This is the ambush on Ferrix, and this is my modified version of the ambush on Ferrix. If you guys saw my community tab, last week I teased that I was working to fully canonize the Mobile Tac-Pod from the ambush on Ferrix. I wanted a whole Canon interior space and as well a few Canon exterior mods. And today we're all done. It's finally time to showcase a fully canonized Mobile Tac-Pod. I not only modified the interior to be canon, I as well did a few exterior mods and the tiniest minifigure mod. And lastly, I slapped these little exhausts on either side of the speeder bike because I thought it looked cool. But other than that, it's finally time to get into this Mobile Tac-Pod. Before we dive too deep into these mods though, if you enjoy LEGO alternate builds and mods, consider subscribing to my channel. I upload every weekend and most of you watching actually aren't. So I did mention that I did a few Canon exterior mods, so we'll go over those first and then we'll get inside because I know that's what you guys are looking for. And if you want to dive right into a specific section of the mods, I do have chapters listed below so you can go ahead and skip to whatever section you'd like. The main mod that I've done to the exterior of the ship was just adding the two side cannons that either wing had. The LEGO set seemed to be missing that, and I'm not too sure why. It was a relatively simple build, and it's not really illegal or too fragile or anything that I think the LEGO group would have a risk of adding onto the set. However, there is one problem, and I'm going to go ahead and assume that this is the reason they didn't include side cannons on the set, is if the wings are folded down, the doors can't quite open or else it'll run into the cannons and potentially knock them off. Either that or I believe it might be due to LEGO working off of concept art and not quite a final product, so they maybe only had so many images, and they weren't quite aware that a cannon may have been on the wings there. But I was able to accomplish these cannons with a simple bracket that allows me to put studs on the side and then a bar with a Technic pin on the end. I was working off of what I believe to be an independent fan render, however it was very accurate to what it looks like in universe, if not exactly canon accurate. And in those renders, it shows that this top cannon is just barely longer than the two side cannons, and I think I managed to accomplish that pretty well. You can just barely see that that top cannon sticks out maybe a stud's length more. But speaking of the top cannon, if you guys saw my original Ambush on Ferrix mod video, you'll know that I heavily modified this to make a much bigger, meaner cannon. But as you can see here, I went ahead and remodified the barrel to be standard from the original set. However, I did change up that stud shooter area and added that dome that the vehicle has in universe. Just using some standard slope pieces and then this rounded brick on the end here. If you do have those slope pieces with a small corner cut out, I would suggest using them on the end here instead of this rounded piece. But I unfortunately didn't have any of those available, so this is what I had to go with. And then on top of adding a side cannon to either wing, I did add some cheese slopes on the end with these headlight bricks to smooth the transition from the wing into the engines here. I think it looks pretty good and it still allows the wings to fold all the way down. Which, speaking of the wings, now you can see that my Mobile Tac-Pod wings actually fold much further down than the original set, and it looks a little more accurate to what the ship looks like when it was docked to the larger Primor carrier. The wings are almost but not quite flush with the sides, making the profile a lot more compact and being able to fit a lot more of these in a tight space. And then lifting up the wings, I actually extended these little side bits out even more than I did in my original Ferrix mod video. I think they've been extended by 1 or 2 plates from my original Ferrix mod video, and then I added these angled plates on the end to hide the differences in plates that you can see beneath it right there. But before we move on to the rear door, just the last bit of exterior mods that I did was this small bit of greebling in between the two engines, using these studs that have the pinholes through them and then a grill piece in the middle with the brackets on the side to encase it all in. But enough about that, let's move on to the rear door and then the inside. All I've really done is add plenty of tiles to hide a lot of those open studs, and then I added these wedge pieces on top to give it a bit more of a uniform shape going up. And with all the exterior mods covered, let's get into the meat and potatoes of this build, the interior space. What you see is correct. I managed to move those large Technic bars going down the middle, rework the structure a little bit, so now we have a full Canon interior space for minifigures to go in and out through the middle. Let's take a look at this structure and how I made that possible, and then we'll go over the play features inside. So you guys can see I was able to accomplish that structure by using some of these Technic axle connectors. And it's a relatively simple structure that you guys could probably recreate just by looking at this video. And it's connected to these bar pieces that are actually on the original set, though it might require a little bit of modification, if not my original Ferrix mod video modification that I made last week. But it is attached to these Technic bits from the original set, and then reinforced on the underside to make the connection a little bit stronger with these inverted slope pieces. And as well, one of the parts of this that I'm most proud of is that this roof piece still sits at the exact same height as the original set. I didn't want to change that up because I think the designers absolutely nailed the angles already. So this structure is certainly more fragile and a little bit more flexible than the original set had with those Technic bars going down the middle. But I've never once just had this entire rear assembly fall out. It's actually pretty tough to wiggle out of there. There's quite a bit of friction holding it in, so you're never going to have a situation like that. It is surprisingly secure for how weak the connection looks. So long as you're not using baby strength and you don't grab it and just absolutely C-clamp down on it, I think you're going to be okay. But you do have to be a little bit more mindful of how much pressure you are putting on the top there. Heading right past the entry ramp, you can see I actually did retain my rear seating mod from the original Ferrix mod video. So you can still totally seat 2 troopers right here ready to deploy as soon as the door opens. as well as troopers in the main space back there. And then I did color change a lot of the parts back here. There was a lot of brown and dark gray, but I wanted it to be a little bit more uniform, so I took out all the brown and replaced it with some light gray pieces, and then added some weapon clips on either side. And then moving into the main section here, you can see I have 3 of my Pre-More officers standing in there, with space for probably about 3 or maybe 4 more, but we're going to safely say 3. And as far as we have seen in Andor, Pre-More Enforcement has run these with a squad of 6 passengers and then 1 pilot. And with all the mods that I have here, I believe we're able to cram 9 figures in here. You can have 1 minifigure piloting the craft. We already have 3 minifigures occupying this space here, and we can safely say we can do 3, 4 if you're cramming, but we're going to go with 3, bringing the count to 7. And then 2 more minifigures in these rear seating bays if you don't want this leading minifigure to have a blaster, bringing the total count to 9 minifigures. But enough about those guys, let's get them out and take a look at what I did inside. So inside this interior space, it's actually rather plain, but that's by design because I wanted to have a lot of interior space. On that far side over there, you can see I just have a small control panel if anybody wants to bring up any last minute briefings, and it is connected by 1 stud, so you can totally rotate it to wherever the minifigure is standing to pull up any holograms or any last minute information. And then on this side, I don't have any extra goodies. I did have some weapon clips here at one point, but they took up way too much space, so I decided to move them to the rear so minifigures can grab them on their way out. Other than that, this personnel bay is pretty plain, but that's obviously by design because we needed to maximize our minifigure space. The last interior space to go over is the cockpit, and from my original Ferrix mod video, nothing has actually changed, except for adding these 1x1 plates up here. I've added these 1x1 plates here just to ensure that this cockpit assembly doesn't slide back. You can just barely see through the windscreen. Those pieces actually lock this bit in from sliding back anymore. And the reason I did that is because this new structure is a little bit more flexible and there's quite a bit of weight in the rear with the wings and the engines. It has a tendency to sag backwards. So that allows those 1x1 pieces to effectively act as buffers, stopping this entire cockpit assembly from sliding any further back than it needs to be sitting. And it just so happens it also leaves the cockpit in a perfect position, minimizing gaps. And speaking of gaps, there's actually one more small mod that I did do on the exterior, and it's just extending out these wedge pieces here. This is a standard version of the Mobile Tac-Pod from the Ambush on Ferrix set, and you can see there's some pretty large gaps right here, and I was not a fan of them at all. I couldn't quite figure out a remedy involving these pieces here and hanging something off the side. So as you can see, I just extended out those wedge pieces on the inside and then added these rounded tiles on the outside to help cover up that gap and give it a bit more of a clean look up front, and I think it rounds it out much better and it looks a bit more armored as well. But with that, I believe that covers pretty much everything that I've done to canonize this Mobile Tac-Pod. Maybe I also changed up some of this smooth tiling on the side here. Originally it did look a little bit hodgepodge, so now I think it looks a bit cleaner. But other than that, I do believe now I finally covered everything that I did to fully canonize this Mobile Tac-Pod. I really hope you guys enjoyed all these mods. I had a really fun time working to make this ship canon to in-universe. Like I mentioned earlier, this new structure is actually relatively simple, and if you guys just paused when I was exposing it, I think you guys could recreate it relatively easily. At first it looked like a little bit of a struggle, and I kind of explained that in last week's video. It's the whole reason I made last week's video, in case this video wasn't even possible. But lo and behold it is, and I don't think it could have turned out any better. If you guys enjoyed these mods, be sure to let me know down below, and let me know what you guys would like to see in the future as well. I love seeing the community suggestions that you guys throw out there. And other than that, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on any new alternate build or mod videos that I post in the future, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace, fellas.